figured you were part of the performing in here. Oh, you're going to perform in here now, but I'm sure you'll be out there for the show.
So I'm pleased to convene and call to order the Climate Action Commission regular agendized meeting on the 14th of August at 6 p.m. I think the first will be the roll call. Natalie?
Commissioner Fogelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Hinerman?
Here.
Commissioner McCloskey?
Here.
Commissioner Nathan?
Present.
Commissioner Ward?
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon?
Here.
Chair Morell?
Here.
Everyone is here, and I want to point out that Youth Member Clements is absent today.
Thank you. Well, yes, our youth member. I see we've added the Pledge of Allegiance to the agenda. Ms. Gates, thank you very much. So let us go ahead and do that. Turn on my speakerphone. The next step is the approval of the agenda as provided by our Community Development Director. Are there any comments from the commissioners about tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I would be pleased to have a motion to approve said agenda. Commissioner Fogelberg, there's a move.
I'll second.
Mrs. Hedra? Second, moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Is there any commentary, discussion of the motion to approve tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. Ms. Natalie, thank you.
Commissioner Fogelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Hinerman?
Aye.
Commissioner McCloskey? Commissioner Nathan?
Aye.
Commissioner Ward?
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon?
Aye.
Chair Morell?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you. The next step are comments from the public. And I don't think we accept any public comments through the electronics anymore. Seeing no members of the public, if you're out in the hallway, 3-2-1-0. Mr. Capps and Dr. Capps is a presenter, so I'm assuming that he's already on the calendar. So, right? No need to come up as a public.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Then I will proceed to close this item of comments from the public. The next item of tonight's agenda, moving right along with alacrity, is the consent calendar. I see only one item. This has to do with receiving the minutes from our regular meeting of this commission on May 8th, 2024. Is there any commissioner comments on the minutes as provided with the agenda? Tom?
I'll just note that I read a lot of minutes, and these are about the shortest that I ever read.
We only do action minutes.
Thank you
so.
for the complimentary comments. Any other comments? I would simply note in the language, I don't have it fully in front of me, where Commissioner X, Commissioner Y spoke, there are two extra odd words that should be deleted before I would approve the minutes. I'm wearing my editorial skills. Do you see them?
Do you remember
Somebody spoke, and then somebody, goodness gracious, spoke. There are two extra words that are not, I haven't memorized them, but they're in there in some odd way. I'd be happy to find them if I had a copy in front of me.
Armando Zimmerman spoke?
No, it was a commissioner, not a public member. It's up higher in the material. It's a small point, but my editorial eyeballs were on there. You can look for it and find it later, Natalie. There are two extra words before the word S-P-O-K-E. With that alteration, are there any? I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I approve. I approve.
You make a motion
Yes,
to
I make a
approve.
motion to approve.
Is there a second to Commissioner Fogelberg's fine motion? Cedra?
Yes, I'll second the fine
Motion
motion.
second. Is there any discussion, commentary?
I'll just thank Chair Morell for the typo correction. I'll just point out, too, that at our Citizens Advisory Committee meeting at the Transportation Authority last month, it was an important typo was fixed. It said that SMART was providing freight service to Sonoma Valley. Had some conversation about freight service, and I just wanted to clarify, was it actually no passenger service and no freight service in Sonoma Valley, or were they actually providing freight service because they had made reference to the LPG trains parked in our area?
And if anybody's listening, we're welcoming Youth Commissioner Kendall Clemons to the commission. Thank you, Kendall. Good evening.
So I appreciate the typo fix. Thank you.
And just not to steal too many more minutes, but this reminds me of a time when, as an EPA official from D.C., I was addressing in Atlanta, Georgia, about 200 mayors, reading my speech, and there was a typo that it was now EPA policy rather than it is not EPA policy. And luckily I caught it before I said the NOW word. Things can happen when little words look quite similar. So that's it. Never forgotten that particular episode. We have approved the minutes, and we're now moving to the
We need to do the vote first.
Oh, we need a vote. Thank you for reminding me,
No
having
problem.
gotten lost in Atlanta, Georgia. So we need a vote. Is there a motion? I don't think so.
Yes, there
Oh,
was.
there is a motion.
Yes.
And a second. So we'll have a vote, please.
Commissioner Fogelberg?
Aye.
Commissioner Hinerman?
Aye.
Commissioner McCloskey? Commissioner Nathan?
Aye.
Commissioner Ward?
Aye.
Vice Chair Conlon?
Yes.
Chair Morell?
Yes.
Youth Member Clements? Aye. The motion passes unanimously.
So now we're moving to the substantive part of the material for this evening. Item 3.1, we're receiving a presentation from the Sonoma County Regional Climate Protection Authority, RCPA, about the GHG greenhouse gas dashboard, and looking forward to this presentation.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chair Morell. First thing, I wanted to confirm that you can see, that you can hear me and you can see my screen all right.
That's a yes and a yes.
Yes.
Very good. I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation file, and so that hopefully should come up. And please let me know if you have any problems with hearing me throughout this, or any problems with the slides. So first off, I wanted to thank you for the invitation to speak. I was hoping to be able to join you in person tonight, but I had a scheduling conflict came up, so I was very thankful also for the flexibility to be able to present remotely here and to present this information to you. I know at least one of your commissioners has seen some of this information before, and I'm happy to very much share the work we've been working on recently with the full commission. So tonight I'll be going over a few items, basically an overview of our recently released greenhouse gas dashboard, which is available online, as well as some graphs from our recently released greenhouse gas inventory, which catalogs countywide greenhouse gas emissions. And so that is the data that feeds into the dashboard. So I wanted to present on kind of both pieces of the work we've been working on. So again, I think, let me introduce myself actually officially. My name is BC Capps. I'm with the Sonoma County Transportation Authority and the Regional Climate Protection Authority. I'm the Climate Programs Manager there, and we work mainly, the organization works really chiefly on both countywide transportation issues and countywide climate issues. So therefore, the greenhouse gas inventory is a work that we have been involved with for a number of years. So first off, I wanted to talk a little bit about and give an overview of the countywide emissions from our most recent greenhouse gas inventory. This slide shows an overview of kind of the work to date. We did our first, RCPA conducted our first community-wide full county inventory in 2016, and that looked at 2010 data and produced a backcast of emissions back to 1990. And it's that 1990 backcast number that a lot of our comparisons are then ranked against, and we look at percentage change in greenhouse gas emissions between the current state of affairs and the backcast to 1990. That inventory was then updated with 2015 data, updated again with 2018 data, and then personally myself, I've been the lead on the update, the two most recent updates of with the 2020 with 2022 data and 2024 data. So with this most recent inventory, we collected data earlier this year between January and June. This information was presented to several of our advisory boards and then presented to our board of directors in July of this year. We then took those results that come out of the inventory and added those to our greenhouse gas dashboard, which is available online. The link to where you can find the inventory the inventory and the dashboard online is an active link that was included on the agenda for this meeting. So that link is live, and I encourage you either during the meeting or afterwards to, you can be able to go there directly and perform some of the same searches that I'll be showing you in a few minutes. And then I'll also be making this presentation available as a slideshow that can be passed along to the commission members. Couple other highlights from this slide I just wanted to call out. When we originally started the inventory effort as part of Climate Action 2020 effort, the county, we worked with all the jurisdictions in the county, and we had set a countywide goal of reaching 25% below 1990 levels by the year 2020, aiming for 40% below by 2030, and aiming for 80% below the 1990 emissions levels by 2050. So those are the goals that we've been chipping away at over the last 10 years or so. RCPA compiled and published a climate mobilization strategy about 2 years ago. And in that strategy document, we really kind of set a reach goal, a stretch goal of attempting to reach carbon neutrality by 2020 or 2030 across the whole county. And at this point, we're really in rough numbers. We're looking for an 80% reduction below those 1990 numbers by 2030. And then we're looking to increase carbon sequestration efforts around the county to sequester some of that remaining carbon that would be going up into emissions. I know there's a question that's been raised before about whether 80% is the correct target to aim for, and that's kind of what we have on the books right now, kind of as our adopted policy, and I think over the upcoming years we'll be reevaluating that, whether we're looking for an 80% reduction, an 85% reduction. You know, it is in that range, and it's a much deeper reduction than where we're at now. Moving on then, this slide shows an overall summary of the results from our the most recent greenhouse gas inventory, as well as all of our past inventories from the previous years. You can see, and this is, again, this is county-wide, community-wide emissions. So these emissions, as much as possible, we partition out to different jurisdictions so that we can get a handle on where the emissions are coming from. But these numbers that I'm presenting right now are really at the county-wide level. And so as you can see from here, our current emissions are at 3.1 million metric tons per year. This is approximately a 21% reduction from that 1990 baseline that was set previously. So we are kind of on the way to those reductions, but we are still kind of below our targets at this point. Even though it does show some dramatic, some good reductions, emissions reductions over the last 30 years that this data covers. The other key highlight to cover on this slide is really looking at the mix of those emissions. We track across 5 different major emission sectors, and you can see on the right-hand column there, transportation accounts for nearly over 57% of those emissions, and buildings, the energy used to run our heat, cool, and run our buildings accounts for over 23%. When we look at those two together, that's over 80% of our emissions profile for the entire county, and I think that theme will come back again, that's really is really where the work of our organization is really focused, as both being the Transportation Authority and the Climate Protection Authority, and looking at those and really focusing in in the near term on transportation emissions and building energy emissions. I'll run through the next few slides rather quickly. These are just, again, kind of showing the trends from 1990 through 2022 for each of those 5 emission sectors. This is zeroing in, focusing in on building energy emissions. We track electricity, natural gas, and what we refer to as stationary sources. That is kind of a label for propane use, kerosene use, and wood use for fuel and cooking throughout the county. And so we're really looking at collecting data from the utilities and from some census data on those. And as you can see, there's been a dramatic decrease in these emissions over time. I'm not planning to go into a lot of the reasoning or the details behind the reductions, but I will highlight within the building energy sector, one of the absolute kind of the dramatic features that's happened, the success stories, has been the creation of Sonoma Clean Power approximately 10 years ago, and the ability for Sonoma County to have a little bit more control over where we purchase the majority of our energy sources, at least for electricity. And so it's really been the incorporation and the work of Sonoma Clean Power that I really want to give credit to with a huge portion of these emissions reductions. Moving on to transportation, we track, here you can see much more of a flat line. Actually what we're seeing is actually not even a reduction from 1990, but even a slight increase. That is, and what we do is we track 3 different kind of major sectors, subsectors. One is looking at on-road transportation. Those are our cars and trucks out on the highways. That's our commute. That's all of our running around our errands. It's kind of the on-road transportation. We track data from off-road emissions, has to do mainly with tractors, things that basically a lot of off-road diesel use that get purchased but can be registered through DMV, but not as an on-road vehicle. And then starting several years ago with the formation of SMART, we've been tracking their diesel usage and the amount of emissions that are created from the diesel locomotives that run that power the SMART service. And one thing there that I wanted to highlight is even though there is a marginal amount of emissions that come from the SMART from the diesel use, the amount of emissions reductions that we're seeing from the number of people riding the train and getting off of getting out of their vehicles is far and away much larger than the amount of emissions that we're seeing created from the diesel use. So just wanted to highlight that. My next slide here is water-related emissions. This is really a lot of the energy that's used for energy that's used for pumping water, what we refer to as water conveyance around the county, and then looking at the wastewater treatment. And through the wastewater treatment process, there's oftentimes an amount of greenhouse gas emissions, mainly in the form of nitrogen oxides that are released from that process, and so we're tracking that over time. You can see on this graph a very dramatic and stark decrease in the water conveyance numbers from 1990 to 2010. My understanding of that dramatic drop is that that is a large part has to do with Sonoma, the Sonoma Water, at that point known as Sonoma County Water Agency, but their zero carbon campaign in which they dramatically invested in renewable energy and worked, were one of the lead agencies that really helped lead the charge to form Sonoma Clean Power. And by basically eliminating the emissions used from Sonoma Water for all of the pumping around the county, that kind of shows, it helps explain that kind of dramatic drop there in the blue bar. Moving on, this is the fourth of our 5 emission sectors. These are solid waste emissions. You can see here the dramatic drop from 1990 to 2010. We worked very closely with Zero Waste Sonoma to compile these numbers. And in the most current 2 years for 2020 and 2022, you'll see a little bit more of a coloration and banding. Their data sources that they're providing to us are a little bit more nuanced now. They're a little more granular. So we're actually able to kind of disaggregate between residential single-family, residential multifamily, commercial, and self-haul. So that would be anybody who drops off actually at one of the disposal sites directly. So that has given us a little bit more of a kind of a window into where we can continue to make reductions there. One of the major efforts that's happening here on the solid waste side is really looking at the organics component of solid waste and looking at how to get that out. And so there's been quite a bit of state and local legislative and policy work done the last few years to get to reduce those emissions or reduce that organic content in the waste stream to reduce that emissions. So that's an effort that we're continuing to work with Zero Waste Sonoma on. And a number of the jurisdictions are, it's a requirement for all the local jurisdictions as well. This is our final segment of our current inventory. So this is looking at agricultural related emissions. This is made up really of fertilizer application on crops and from manure management from livestock. So you can see the majority of the emissions in the ag sector appear to be from manure management. And so there's a lot of areas, I think, for improvement here. And we are kind of continuing to develop deeper relationships with our kind of ag producers, kind of the ag community, to kind of look at efforts here to reduce those emissions further. And I guess I should point out these bars, each of these charts is actually not to scale with the others. So these bars are actually fill up the whole chart, but in comparison to the other sectors, comparison to buildings and transportation, this is still a very small sector in comparison. So here's a couple of take-home, just kind of key findings from that, from our most recent inventory. So the emissions really have decreased over 21% from 1990. We're seeing a slight increase, though, from the values that we saw in 2020. We really think that that is apparent, that is an artifact of the 2020 values being artificially low due to the impacts of COVID-19 and the economic slowdown. So we were expecting that our 2020 numbers might actually be low, and that's actually been borne out with these most recent, the most recent inventory. Transportation continues to be the largest source of emissions in the county, with nearly 58% of the total. Building energy emissions decreased 45% between 1990 and 2022, and solid waste emissions decreased over 50% during that time. To meet our goals is we need dramatic emissions reductions. I think that probably everybody on this commission is very aware of that. So we need to have both some dramatic reductions as well as some large increases in carbon sequestration to meet the carbon neutrality goals that have been set for 2030. Before I move on to the next section of the presentation, I did want to highlight one piece here, and that is given that our emissions profile is highest in building energy and in transportation, that really, I think, is, we're then using that as evidence of kind of that leads into the two major work projects that our organization is focusing on in the short order. I personally am going to be leading an effort on an equitable building electrification action plan, which will look very deeply at everything around building energy and how to decarbonize buildings at the county scale, kind of at scale, across all buildings, across all building types. So that is something that I'm going to be working on for the next few months, really looking at building energy. And then several of my colleagues with the SCTA, with the Transportation Authority, are really taking the lead on the countywide active transportation plan and are doing a lot of work directly with different jurisdictions, I believe including Sonoma, to update the active transportation plan and to look at areas, additional areas to get individuals out of their vehicles and convert some of those trips to more passive methods that don't use fossil fuels at all, or use a lot less. So just wanted to highlight the work that we're going to be doing in the next few months, or currently working on building energy and on transportation. So now, I wanted to use the next section to highlight some specifics around the city of Sonoma and looking at some of the kind of a subset of that countywide emissions profile. So here you can see, I'll actually show the emissions in a minute. This graph here is looking at the population levels for each of the incorporated jurisdictions, and then looking at the emissions released per jurisdiction by person. So looking at a per capita level to try to normalize things a bit so that we can kind of compare apples to apples, because in some of the jurisdictions, some of the cities are much larger than others. It's tough to compare just the raw numbers, but when we look at emissions per person, it brings a better view to kind of show kind of where we can, which jurisdictions may be doing, have deeper emissions reductions, and which where we can work with different jurisdictions to bring theirs down. So this here is a specific graph of the emissions from the city of Sonoma over from 1990 to 2022. So again, you can see that same generally downward trend. I don't have the percentage number here in front of me, but I'm going to guess that it is something very equivalent to what we're seeing at the countywide level. And through the use of the dashboard that I'll show in just a minute, you all will be able to dial in and dig into these numbers directly and get a lot more information and kind of do some investigation yourself. The last slide in this section, or actually two slides I wanted to show here that feed into those per capita, that per capita thinking that I was showing earlier, or was talking about earlier. This is showing just general population trends, general employment trends, and general household trends for the city of Sonoma over the, from 1990. So as you can see, increases in all three of those metrics from 1990 to 2010, and then some changes, but fairly steady over those intervening years. And so the key thing to note here on this slide is that those trends are flatlined, in general are flatlined across. If I go to the next slide, here are then the emission trends by each of those metrics. So we're looking at emissions per household, emissions per employee, emissions per person. And as we can see, all of those are trending downward, which I think is a very, obviously that's the trend that we're looking for, but it actually shows that there's a little bit more nuance to the story than just raw number of emissions that are released, that really if we can look at it at a per person or a per person, per household basis, it may help to untangle some of these areas, kind of unlock some of these opportunities that we may have to get, to continue to bring down emissions. Let me move now into the final section of this presentation I wanted to present a few slides about our climate dashboard. So this is available online, like I said. The link is directly there in the agenda packet. And I just grabbed some snapshots, some screenshots, really quickly to just kind of show some of the features it has. This is what kind of the home page of the dashboard looks like. We're using the software that's being used to power this is Microsoft Power BI. It's a software tool that's kind of designed for doing dashboards. And so this has been updated now. This is live online with 1990 through 2022 data. It also includes some land cover data from 2013 and 2022, which we are using for evaluation of carbon sequestration. That kind of land cover data is not integral to our emissions profile at this point, but will become much more important over time. And then I also wanted to highlight we're working in-house to add some additional features and functionality to the dashboard I'm going to show you today, and we hope to unveil kind of the version 2 of the dashboard will be sometime early in 2025. So everything that you're seeing here today is live, is ready to go, and then we're continuing to work on improvements. So just a few little screenshots here to kind of show that using the selectors. So on the home screen, we're looking at total greenhouse gas emissions. And by using the selector, the drop down, or it's actually drop up, selector menus at the bottom, I've been able to zero in just on the city of Sonoma. So let me go back one slide. Here we have the full emissions profile for the entire county. Here, by using the menu, we're able to zero in on the city of Sonoma. And then if we use the next kind of drop down, or the menu choice, we're then able to zero in just on 2022 data. So as you can see, there's an example. As an example, one could then use this to compare 1990 versus 2010, 2010 versus 2015, 2015 versus 2018. You can kind of use and zero in on any sort of any of the time segments that you would like to zero in on. Let's see. So then the next slide, so this is total GHGs. The next slide that's available, or the next kind of window that's available as part of the dashboard, is kind of zeroing in on our buildings energy. So again, I've selected this, I've restricted the search to just show emissions trends and usage trends from the city of Sonoma. And now this is showing both electricity, natural gas, and stationary sources all kind of combined. By then using some of the other drop-downs or the other menu choices, we can zero in and just say, I'd like to just look at City of Sonoma electricity. So there you can see we've got electricity emission trends broken out by residential, non-residential. We've got the full building emission trends. And then you can also see the electricity consumption trends. So that's kind of the raw greenhouse, or the raw kilowatt hours that are being used that lead into these calculations. And in my next slide here, we can kind of look at the same thing. City of Sonoma specific, this is natural gas. And the last one, and then one could then also, I didn't include a slide, but one could then also, you could bring in natural gas and electricity together, or just stationary sources. You can kind of mix and match. Going on to transportation really quick. Again, there's a theme here, and I don't necessarily need to go through all the details, but you can kind of see here's transportation as a whole, zooming in on the city of Sonoma. Here is these are water emissions. Again, zeroing in on the city of Sonoma, you can use the checkboxes to select different years, different activity types, different subsectors. And here we have, this is looking at, this is solid waste numbers, solid waste values over that same time period. And again, you can see this is zeroing in on City of Sonoma, and I'm just seeing the solid waste, in the solid waste graph there in the very center of the screen, looking at the drop from 2018 to 2020. fantastic, amazing, drop. Those are some of the drops we're looking for, and I think that that's probably attributable to the organic standards that have been passed. But this way you're able to disaggregate and pull out and say, how is our jurisdiction doing compared to the rest of the county? How are we doing compared to this jurisdiction? Here we're looking at agricultural emissions. And then I think the final slides I have here, just a couple last slides here. This is the page we have on land and forest. This is data that is coming directly from the County of Sonoma, from the Ag Preservation and Open Space District, and from the county's Climate Action and Resiliency Division. This is looking at land cover changes between this is between 2013 and 2022. So this is kind of just more snapshot data. Again, it can be broken down by jurisdiction, and then can be broken down by jurisdiction, by year, and by land cover type. So looking at how is developed land changed over that year versus, grasslands. Final two slides on the dashboard. Included in here as one of the links is actually 2 pages we have here with some more instructions, and kind of instructions and an About Us page, kind of about the dashboard page, gives a little bit more background information, and then gives this page here, kind of the instructions tab, gives a bit more context and maybe goes over some of the same things that I've tried to describe here tonight. And hopefully, so that's really kind of looking at the some additional information that's built into the dashboard. So let's see. This is my final slide. Before I stop sharing, I did want to share, actually no, that concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I had one last thing I wanted to share. And let's see. And I think that, so the final piece I wanted to share, so all of the work that I've been showing tonight, this is all work that's coming from in-house from SCTA and RCPA, our organization. I wanted to highlight one other community citizen-led effort that is being done by a community member in Sebastopol. I didn't include any slides, but I wanted to mention it because I'm finding it very useful. And the website I wanted to share is called cityclimatedashboard.org. And this is being put together and basically pulling, this is, instead of looking at emissions data, this is looking at indicator data. It's looking at a lot of the trends that lead towards emissions. What is energy use in the community over time? What is natural gas use? What are transportation trends? This website is pulling public access data from a number of government agencies, a number of government websites, and then sharing that and putting it together in some pretty, I have to admit, pretty attractive graphs that then I think could make, I don't think we'll be able to integrate the work with what we're doing, but it makes some very good complementary work to say pull up multiple graphs from this other website, the cityclimatedashboard.org site, and then compare them with our GHG emissions dashboards. So that was what I had to share tonight. I am absolutely I'm happy to take any questions or answer anything that's come up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, BC. On behalf of the Commission as a whole, an excellent presentation. I turn now to my fellow commissioners for comments, questions, follow-up. Commissioner Fogelberg has the red light on.
I'd also like to second David's compliments. This is huge. When I look at this and think about working with it, if we need some additional coaching on how the site works, who do we call or how do we dive into that?
And David, I want to, I am happy to answer any questions, either tonight or on the phone or via email. My contact information is in the slides, and it's easy to share. So I would be more than happy to answer any questions.
Can you hear us, BC?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay, we're going to try again. Go ahead, Norma, can you?
Oh, yes. Did you hear my question, PC?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're good.
Okay.
I think we're good, and Norma's looking. It sounds like the primary point of contact is Mr. Capps, and his team as appropriate is what I believe was his response to Norma's fine question.
Yes. Feel free to please email or call. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up.
Great. Thank you so much, and again for this work.
You're welcome.
Cedra,
Thank
you're
you.
on.
Hi there. Thank you again. This was fantastic presentation. I have a couple questions about the dashboard itself, and I'm curious about I'm going to focus in first on Sonoma, and then I'm going to pull back out to a bigger picture question. So let me ask my Sonoma specific questions first. What is the highest level of resolution that we could look at in terms of data? So you showed us Sonoma, but can we drill down into like a block area, for example? So if we're doing changes within the city, infrastructure changes, planting trees, trying to do sequestration, are we looking at data that's averaging across the city, or can I get down into a block level, census block, or some other unit of analysis to see what changes are happening? So that's my first question. And then the next question is, you've been looking at change through time. You did backcasting to 1990, and I'm going to presume that we've already tackled the low-hanging fruit. But I'm curious if you think that's also true from a county-wide perspective. You mentioned active transportation. That's a lot of people think of that as low-hanging fruit. I'm not sure if I agree with that. But I'm just kind of curious as to what you think are the low-hanging fruit across the county and for jurisdictions, and if there's a geographic zone that is also an area of focus for that.
Well, let's see. I think first on the granularity of the data, our data in this dashboard only goes down to the jurisdiction, the city level. And I would also caution, or at least put in the caveat that it is a rough approximation of the city. Some of the data, we partition the data out as closely as we can get to some of the, to the city boundaries. It is, some of those boundary lines are in the data are fuzzy. So we're working with the data that we have, but for the dashboard that we have, it's only granular down to the city. The alternate site that has to do with other indicator data, cityclimatedashboard.org, I believe that does go down to the census block and census group level. So that may be, at least for trends on, that may be a useful site for other, for the kind of the more granular data. And then on the question of low-hanging fruit, that's a tough, some of the low-hanging fruit that we have tackled at the county has been like the creation of Sonoma Clean Power, a major undertaking, multi-years, but it is, so even the low-hanging fruit are oftentimes very complex, I guess, is where I was trying to go. So I think a lot of the pieces have already been, a lot of the stones have already been overturned, and kind of looking for those. There are, our hope is that really by coordination between the jurisdictions and among partners, that there's some areas where we really could bring some synergies. And so like decarbonizing all of the buildings across the county, not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but it's something that I think that we can make dramatic progress on, kind of working together. So, not sure if that fully answers your question, but I think that's, my mind these days is really focused on the building energy side. So,
No, actually, that does answer it. I mean, I think that's where we also went, was looking for synergy and collaboration, because this is such a complex issue. That's about the only way we're seeing to go as well. Thank you very much.
I would just add that we indeed have been conversing a good deal with Petaluma, which has made a number of successful efforts and provides some models for us in Little Sonoma to be thinking about. Other comments that AC knows I'll have a bunch at the end, but I'm going to turn to my own commissioners first.
I'm Phil Hinerman.
Philip's turn.
Relatively new to the process. There's a lot to dig in here. I think I have more of a background in buildings. I'm lead accredited and have been involved a number of years. And what I was struck about was how low the percentage for buildings was. And I'm curious as to how you came up with the subsectors. For example, I think the national average of buildings is around 35%, and we're at 23%. Did you factor in things like construction materials, embodied carbon, things that, for example, the formaldehyde in flooring that lumber liquidators that problems breaks down into carbon monoxide in the environment? How do you did you factor those issues into the numbers that you came up with, and will you, or just sort of give me a background on where those subsectors come from?
So, the current inventory does not include kind of embedded carbon. It doesn't include the building materials. It doesn't include that. It's really looking at the flows on an annual basis, the flow of electricity, the flow of natural gas, the flow of our solid waste stream. So it's not including those. And then as far as the sectors that we use, all this work is based on, we use the protocol that was developed by ICLEI several years ago. I'm blanking on the exact protocol now, but it is
It's the U.S. Community Protocol.
thank you. We're actually not using the U.S. Community Protocol. We're using the other one. But we're using a protocol developed by ICLEI that is specifically around community emissions, and in that protocol document, they kind of outline the major sectors and the major subsectors, and that's what our RCPA has used since the first inventory was done.
Okay, so my recollection is from the work that we've done that approximately 10% of the carbon emissions are related to construction materials and to issues related around the application and embodied carbon. That's a pretty significant component. Are there plans at some point, you mentioned it earlier, are there plans at some point to get into that area?
We don't have any, as an organization, we do not have any direct plans to kind of work in that, other than tangentially or other than alongside our work that would be done really looking at decarbonization. The majority of work we have planned is really looking at conversion of natural gas building equipment to electric as kind of pieces of equipment kind of burn out. So that's really where our focus is. I will kind of think that through on the embedded carbon and kind of think through, and I could get back to you with some ideas on how we may be able to integrate some of that work.
I won't belabor too much, but of course, most of the building scores for sustainable buildings for most of the organizations that do that do consider building components significantly, and from the number of the programs that I've been to, the focus has been really, a lot of it's been on embodied carbon, and we've made some great progress. And if I wanted to find out what subsectors were included in all the different portions of your report, is there someplace on the website that says, other than what you've given us as subsectors listing, that breaks out in more detail what those subsectors are?
I believe I do not know if there is a direct link to the protocol document, but I can easily find that and include that so that you can have that directly.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And thanks for your presentation. It's very, very, lots of stuff in here to think about and look at.
Very good. You're welcome.
Other commissioner comments or questions? Leo?
Thanks so much for the presentation. It was impressive. One thing I think I've seen, it looks like the demographics are related to the carbon emissions. Looks like, for example, it looked like my town, Sonoma, that only less than half the people work. The households seem like they're reducing the load, but when you must have 2 people per household then, one working, one not, sort of. Or else there must be a group of people that are retired. And then I saw Santa Rosa, just at the poles apart, that Santa Rosa's had one of the lowest, looks like, production of carbon emissions compared to the richer towns like Sonoma, like Sebastopol. And I wonder if it would be interesting to tie the humans to the data, and get some demographic data, get on income. It starts to unwind commuting, and then the tourism. It doesn't seem that the tourism is as big as the demographics of the population and their wealth. That's my question.
So when it comes to the kind of demographics we're using, we're pulling data from it's basically census tables that are using the designations that are in the census for the jurisdictions, and that's where we're pulling the household size, population size, household size, and employment numbers are coming from the, I believe it's the American Community Survey as part of the census. And then as far as, I wasn't sure what your exact question was on the tourism, but I think in general, this is capturing any sort of electricity use. It's capturing things that are kind of trackable back to a local resident of some sort. So it's looking at residents' VMT values, not necessarily travel from tourism. Or it would include things like electricity use at hotels that is tied directly with tourism, but not necessarily counting the vehicle trips that a tourist is taking when they're in town.
But we've talked about as, hi, it's Jennifer, BC. We've talked about on the climate group for RCPA that consists of representatives from each of the cities, the staff. We have talked about there and in our planning advisory committee as well about working on the traffic model and looking at ways to grab VMT because we are so many tourist communities, and so we're starting to explore what's going to be needed to do that moving forward, and we do recognize that as staff too, that we do need to look at the impacts of tourists.
Can I just
Sandra,
follow up on
you're in.
follow up on the comment that Leo just made, because I think that's a really interesting point about human behavior and slippage of numbers, because populations that have people who are working, you're counting that electrical use, that those in their places of employment, and their houses are necessarily not generating electrical use. And in populations where there are naturally occurring retirement communities, that use by those hours and days and behavior doesn't have people working in behavior in places of employment if it's not in a residence, let's say. And so that information has a behavioral element in terms of where you're generating numbers from resident to business. You see what I'm saying? And so there's we used to do a daily use activity tracking with people to see what's happening, to try to also deal with that error slippage, basically, between what's really happening with per person energy use versus resident business kind of thing, because it's the same human. Anyways, that's just a point I wanted to pick up from Leo that I think it's really might be misleading in terms of what's the per capita of Sonoma versus any other place when you track it, tie it to an individual versus how you're actually measuring. Your measurement is not actually linked to the person. Anyways, just a, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, great.
Amber, you were in the game? Here
I'm
we
in the
go.
game. Hi, BC. This was amazing, and I'm already having fun playing with it. I'm just wondering if there's a way to export the data into, if I want to put it in Excel or something.
We are looking to incorporate a data download feature that would allow you to download directly. This is all data, though, that I can make available kind of on a at this point in the current state, kind of I can make available as a kind of as a personal request or as an information request and pass along. And we're hoping that the newer version of the dashboard that will be available in January or February of next year would then have a direct kind of click here for download.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Conlon, I think you've been eager to get into this game.
Well, I've seen it now. This is my third time, and so I don't want to belabor some of the things I've talked with BC about before. But yes, it's wonderful for us. We are lucky to have this kind of expertise and this kind of, a tool to help us drill into these data. I think it's important to start with an observation that, BC, I think you've given to other groups, but maybe you just overlooked it for our group tonight, and forgive me if I was just not paying attention. But that this is an activities-based inventory, and it's not a consumption-based inventory, which is a very different method and tends to result in roughly 3 times more emissions, absolute emissions. This is really just the activities that are occurring within the sort of the sphere of influence, the control of the jurisdictions. And that's why it's tracked. That's why it's important for us in the jurisdiction to have this data in front of us. But it's different from for example, the tool that I've shared with my fellow commissioners on this body, the Lawrence Berkeley Labs developed California Cool Carbon Calculator, now hosted by the Air Resources Board. So that's just a contextualizing comment. And then I have a couple questions. And most of them go to this issue that a couple of my colleagues have raised about indicators that are driving these results. And I think you had said previously that you are preparing on a future release of the dashboard to make some of those indicator data available. And I guess to Amber's question, I was curious, are those in the spreadsheet download that you just offered to share, or that's not really available yet, that indicator driving data?
The indicator data is not yet compiled and available yet.
Okay, because obviously that's going to start to solve some of the more granular questions that all of us have started raising here tonight, and most of my other questions. So for example, I noticed that the SMART, the addition of the train to the overall transportation profile, it jumped around quite a lot in the last 3 years. It went from about 1,000 to 3,000 down to from 2,000 down to 1,000 back up to 3,000 now. And it'd be interesting to know the number of trips that those trains are taking, and then also the number of riders, because you made the statement that SMART has been more, has reduced emissions relative to on-road emissions. But I think there's some concern, we want to understand maybe SMART also induced some trips too, because it's a new mode of travel, and adding a lane or adding another mode of travel does increase travel. So we'll want to drill into those drivers of the SMART profile. On solid waste, I was curious to know, like especially here in the city of Sonoma, I know our waste goes to Napa for processing, so it leaves the county. And when it gets landfilled outside the county, are you calculating city of Sonoma's long-term degrading of our long-term wastes as part of the Sonoma County emissions profile?
I would need to go back and confirm with the data we get from Zero Waste Sonoma, but my understanding is that that is based upon the origin of the waste, not necessarily where it's being deposited or being processed. So the solid waste numbers, I think, should include waste that's collected within the city, independent upon whether it's staying in the county for disposal or going outside the county.
Right. So, and obviously it matters both where it comes from, but also the degree of efficiency of methane capture at the ultimate landfills. So that's something I'm curious about, to know if our current waste hauler and our current landfill service provider are comparable to the other services provided to other jurisdictions around the county. And right now we don't have transparency into that question. So that's something I have had a long-term question about. Again, back to indicators, you got asked this question at the RCPA board meeting by David Rabbit. The number of animals countywide over since 1990. His perception, and I think I would share this, is that we've been losing dairies throughout the county. However, by your numbers, it looks like the methane and other impacts haven't really changed that much. So I've been curious, is that an offset? Is there some offsetting going on there? Is chickens growing, or are cows just getting bigger and smaller numbers of cows, but bigger farms? I don't, fewer farms, but bigger cows. What's going on?
I would need to go back and look at the memo that I put together after our board meeting. My memory is that it is fewer dairies, but more cattle for beef.
Yeah.
And many, many, many more chickens over the last 20 to 30 years.
Anecdotally or just qualitatively, that seems right to me.
Right.
So thanks for that.
Until the recent quelling of a lot of chickens due to the some of the illnesses that changed the Petaluma numbers quite substantially.
Which theoretically becomes part of the solid waste.
Lowered a lot of animals.
Yeah. Forgive me. And then I noticed too on slide number 27, your carbon stock slide, it looked as if developed land uses have significantly more stored carbon on them than forests. And I have not seen that before. I haven't actually looked at that graph before. And that just doesn't make sense to me, but so I'm curious if I'm understanding what that graph is actually measuring. So I might be misunderstanding that.
That is a very good question, and I will go back and confirm my understanding of what that graph is showing. If that is indeed showing that there's more carbon stored in developed land, then I'm guessing that that is looking at street trees. But I have to admit, that is a very good question. I will investigate that.
It just popped out at me when you were going over it, so I just thought I'd mention it. And then finally,
Tom, one thing just while we're on 27,
cool.
There's a great deal of new data, BC, coming from the Resilient Forests Coalition that's working now, and we'll have a report out by early next calendar year. Some of us are deeply involved in that with Tembra Costa and her group, and I know the county is involved. But RCPA will get a lot of new data on Sonoma County forestry and its carbon stocks.
Very good.
Thank you. And then the last question had to do with Steve Pierce's City Climate Dashboard.org tool. And one of the questions I asked Steve when he first shared that data was, it appears that in contradiction of our activity-based inventory numbers that are basically driven by PG&E's data request, our request each year to PG&E, that his data suggests that natural gas consumption has been steadily going up in most of the county jurisdictions. And that seems counterintuitive to me, because we would expect through electrification activities as well as through efficiency activities that would be an opposite trend would be happening. So I'm wondering if that's driven primarily by affluence or by better data collection and some kind of data anomaly. So just something to pay attention to see if that, as we start to dig into these indicators, we'll start to perhaps expose some of the strengths or weaknesses of our existing data sets and analytical approaches. So those are always got a lot of questions for you, always very appreciative of your excellent efforts and all your good answers. So thanks again, BC.
Thank you, Tom. Other commissioners, before I leap in as the cleanup batter here. I'd like to start with the population emission trends chart number 15. We again have begun to touch on the fact that we believe a VMT from tourism is a tremendous impact here in the city of Sonoma, and we need to find some ways to capture that in a trend system like this. And it's not easy, but we need at least some surrogate measures, and we'd be eager to work with you and your team on thinking that through, because our sense is that a large volume of our overall VMT emissions, which are our largest total overall, are coming from a combination of tourism and employees driving in because of the lack of affordable housing. So we'd love to work further with you and your data team to sort of come to grips with that issue. Similarly, with number 15, the population emission trends, I would love it if at some point you and your team, perhaps using the city climate dashboard data, would add in the Springs urbanized area to the city of Sonoma numbers, because we have an urbanized area here which is well beyond the boundaries of the city of Sonoma, and looking at population trends there would be extremely interesting. Not easy, but by some way beginning to vector toward that understanding would be really important.
David?
Yes, ma'am.
BC, this is Norma Fogelberg. Are you thinking of that as folded into the Sonoma information or as a separate
Added
line?
onto, so folded in,
So in
it
other
wouldn't
words,
separate out. The city numbers are important within the city boundaries.
right.
But I'm also intrigued by the possibility of beginning to look at this as an urbanized complex, which it
Because-
truly is as you move around the urban area of Sonoma Valley, and looking at that as a complex would be very interesting, particularly population-wise as well as totals, because of the density of population in that area. And the degree to which people in that area are coming in to shop, to work in the city, and so on. There's some very interesting data could emerge from that over time. Not easy, but important.
I agree with that, but I'd like to see it from my perspective as an unincorporated line item and not folded into the official population.
Oh, there's nothing official about it as you go outside, but it could be both kept separate and incorporated, folded in, so that we understand what the urban complex is producing from a greenhouse gas perspective.
Agreed.
On slide number, where's the number, 17 BC, I think I'm reading a 2030 goal of 80% reduction from 1990 levels for Sonoma County. I would note my understanding that the City of Sonoma Council has set a goal of net zero by 2030. So that's a rather different goal than a percent reduction goal. It's a net zero target. And that's something that RCPA should pick up on, since that is an official city adopted goal. A general question: to what degree do your data include emissions from fires, 2017, 2020 in particular. My impression is total loadings are quite high from those two fires, and I'm wondering to what degree can we take that into account? Have we taken into account? And obviously, what the hell happens with the next fire? But we have 2017 and 2020. Do we have any data on that?
Data on emissions from wildfires is not included as part of the inventory, and I think that goes back to the original protocol documents having to do with the fact that those are biogenic sources.
Well, statewide, these are very big numbers when you look at the statewide numbers and our failure to meet the GHG goals of the state of California. So it would be interesting to at least have RCPA come to grips with some of this, or CARD, somewhere between the two, and with the PG&E money that flowed in from these fires. Just a thought. A similar, though related thought, you and I have been around the NBCI business over the years on adaptation, as you'll happily recall. And we're concerned in this commission about beginning to think about climate adaptation issues. To what degree is the regional RCPA beginning to deal with not just emission reductions, which are core, of course, but adaptation issues as the world warms and the water flows and so on?
I think we are trying to work on adaptation as much as possible. Our main focus is on the climate mitigation side, on emissions reductions. RCPA is a member of the Bay Area Climate Adaptation Network that's being led right now by Michael McCormick and his consulting group. So that is our main conduit to Bay Area-wide kind of adaptation initiatives. A lot of the work of that group is on sea level rise, and so a lot of the work, well, I guess it would actually be appropriate here to mention SCTA does have a fair amount of, is taking an actively leading role in Highway 37 planning and looking at kind of sea level rise and adaptation in that, kind of in that location. And then for myself personally, a lot of the adaptation topics that are coming to the forefront have mostly to do with heat impacts, outdoor workers and heat impacts, or heat impacts to other kind of at-risk populations, the youth, elderly, people without air conditioning, things like that.
Thank you. It's again, this commission is beginning to touch on this. Our primary focus has been on emission reductions to get us to net zero by 2030, for heaven's sakes. But beginning to think about adaptation, smoke emissions as well as another piece of it, along with sea level rise and the great fun of Highway 37. Let's see. I would just have you say a little more about the sequestration piece. It's a component that we've begun to touch on here at this city commission and haven't gotten very far on. What's RCPA thinking at this point about carbon sequestration opportunities and challenges?
Over the last couple of years, we have been leading or helping to lead an effort that was a compost application project that was looking at increasing compost applications on farmlands. And so that project ran for about 2.5, 3 years and is just now wrapped up. The other major area where we're working on carbon sequestration is as part of the, we use the acronym SMAC. It's the Sonoma Marin Ag and County Climate Collaborative. And so it's a cooperative. It's basically using funding from USDA and the National Conservation Resource Service that is coming through the county's Climate Action and Resiliency Division, and then working directly with RCPA and all of the resource conservation districts throughout both Sonoma County and Napa County. And so we're using that as really the main vehicle right now both for thinking about carbon sequestration, mainly on ag and rangelands, and then also to deepen our connections with the agricultural community and look for areas on that. There's also a lot of work that's being done on more of the forest-based carbon sequestration. We are kind of not as active in that arena and are allowing really it's the Open Space District and some of the other organizations are kind of leading on more of the forest-based practices right now.
Yeah, Kim Batchelor has been very involved in that work with some other things, other hats I wear. But that's what I wanted. I very much want to thank you for the detail, for what you're doing, how well it's coming, and how important it is. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a pleasure to present. And as I mentioned earlier, any questions that come up, big or small, please just go ahead and please contact me. I will also, there's a few follow-up items that I took notes on here tonight. I will try to compile some quick responses, and I'll run those back through Jennifer so that she can get those to you, Chair Morell, and then on to the other commission members.
Thank you. Anything else before we let this fine gentleman get back to his family at this hour? Going once, twice. Thank you, BC.
Thanks, BC.
Okay,
Much
great. Thank you all.
appreciated.
Good night now.
All right, let's see. Put my eyeglasses back on to see where we are next. So we've had the minutes. Okay, and that's 3.1. We're now on to 3.2 on our agenda for this evening, ad hoc committee reports. We have a series of ad hoc committees, as we all know, and we have some reports that are both presented in writing and available orally. And let's start with the sequence that's presented in the agenda this evening. The grants and funding ad hoc, which is Commissioner Nathan, Vice Chair Conlon, and myself as the three, not to violate the Brown Act, with four commissioners on this one. So, Cedra, did you want to do a little bit of a summary of what we've done on grants and funding at this point and where we're going next? I think you have a brief statement on that ready to go.
All right, so as David mentioned, Tom and David and I met for the grants funding. And basically, we went through and tried to evaluate what the opportunities were, what our strengths, weaknesses were, and what we could pursue on behalf of the city as focused on our climate action strategies. And so we did apply for the CAL FIRE urban forestry and community forestry grant application, and they should have let us know about that by the end of this month, next month. I will say, I think Jennifer sent out where the status of that is. So there was $30 million, $150 million in requests. But to drill down a little bit more for that, for our grant application, they're really emphasizing communities that are disadvantaged. And of the 30 applications in our grant area, 19 of them are designated as DAC, 11 of them are not. We would be in the not category, which we are in the low income priority category. We knew this when we applied. It was really more about having us be focused and developing a framework for us. And that I still think was a wild success. We weren't wildly optimistic, but it was a very useful thing to do because it helped organize our thinking about trees, urban forests, and priorities to achieve our climate action goals with a focus on sequestration where trees could be. So all that went really well. Then we also, through some of the work that Tom had done, looked at some of the active transportation opportunities out there and started coalescing ideas around things like safe streets for all, and looking at what some of the, as we just had our last presentation, the importance of collaboration and synergies and what other groups are doing and how we might be able to better leverage the assets that we have in the city with other community efforts and conservation efforts and infrastructure efforts and greening efforts and energy efforts. And so that's where we got into some pending and implementation things that we're seeking. And so one of the action items that we're certainly looking for is to identify if we can have the city seek, for example, electric trolley service for a hop-on, hop-off kind of infrastructure that would not only be throughout the city, but also moving up to other hotels up in the Springs as a way to reduce the transportation greenhouse gas emissions, because most of our transportation in the city is trips that are less than 2 miles. So it would both serve residents and tourists alike. And so we're looking for those co-benefits, those situations that both serve residents and tourists equally, because both those groups generate funds for our general fund in about the same ratio. We're also looking to try to have the city pursue, in collaboration with the county, something that's known as a priority conservation area. Those designations that you submit for with the prioritize or elevate conservation lands, particularly around riparian areas. And in the report that we had sent out, that's the Sonoma County Ag and Open Space Vital Lands Initiative priority greenbelt areas. And what that means is that the last presenter mentioned the Baylands project. That's a $600 million investment project for climate tidal estuary restoration and rehabilitation for adaptation for climate change. But what they're also interested in is the upland area and how those lands and the streams, what the priority streams are, would impact baylands. That's the Sonoma Creek, that's us. And so if we get this designation, that could help us with some of our urban forestry plans, because east and west side of the Sonoma Creek would be beneficial for us, and there'd be a collaborative opportunity with these priority conservation areas, should we get that designation. And then finally, there was an idea of going after a Vision Zero action plan. This really could be in combination with a active transportation plan. Now remember, all these things, these aren't new things, they're meant to be organizing ideas to implement our strategy, our climate action strategies. So all these ideas are just umbrellas to implement the climate action strategies. So that's the grants, and I think, oh yeah, that's right, I have something I'm supposed to be reading too. So the Grants Funding Committee, let me do this. The CAC Ad-Hoc Grants Funding Committee plans to collaborate with city staff, nonprofits, and outside experts to identify and pursue appropriate funding opportunities targeted at securing funds for a range of actions that can support and enhance our CAC climate strategies. There we go. So has that...
Excellent and very, very helpful. Any questions for our colleague or other members of this ad hoc group moving forward to bring in some money to support our climate action efforts? Tom and Jennifer? Let's go with Tom first, then we'll go to Jennifer.
Just one extra point was to, I think it was in the report, but Mike Thompson has managed to sequester for the Donald Gap, just north of the city limits, a $1.25 million investment in improving the bridge over Agua Caliente Creek, which currently in the last year or so we've had the bollards placed in there, the short-term plastic bollards, which has made a dramatic safety improvement in that area. But this is a long-term project that's going to take, I think, as much as $5 million to do, but it will really improve connectivity, active transportation connectivity between the Springs and the city. And so it's a very high priority project, I think, for both the city and the county, and I'm glad to see that Congressman Thompson was able to help us get that funded in part today.
Excellent, thanks. Jennifer?
I just wanted to add two things. One is we do get, from time to time, the Sonoma County Parks asks us to write letters of support, so staff does write letters of support for active transportation projects. I just wrote one for the Shelville Trail to 8th Street East design request for funds. So I do want to let you know that when we do receive them, we do follow, if we have it in our plan or identify it as part of one of our work efforts, that I'll automatically send in the letters of support for things like that. The other is a recommendation that I see that you're already working with Public Works, and I'm assuming the traffic safety on the Safe Streets grant, and I know they got a Go Sonoma funding for design, I think near the Sasserini School, if I remember correctly. And another recommendation is Provision 0. It really should be a Traffic Safety Commission component to it, because we're reaching that 0 deaths, 0 everything. So it's really a traffic safety as well, kind of major component.
Are you suggesting we have like a joint meeting with them? Is that?
I'm suggesting to, we'll meet after all of these and talk as a group or ad hoc with staff, but this is something that I think should be a Vision 0 Public Works initiative in their work plan, and then we kind of feed our components into it.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and in terms of timing, I believe we have the active transportation plan, which did a bunch of outreach, and I know a number of people in this commission and other members of the community provided input to the consultants and the team at our CTA working on that. So I think we're about to get back those results. If we haven't gotten them back yet, but they're going to come back. So maybe once that data comes back, that would be the proper time to convene that discussion between traffic safety and other public works and other key stakeholders to make sure that we're all on the same page and can then mobilize our grant writing volunteer force assembled here to help bring the dollars rain here in Sonoma.
And not only assembled here, we've identified a couple of other volunteers in the community eager with technical writing skills, ready to work with us to move this whole process forward on an ongoing basis. Yes, Leo.
The question I have is, are we, not that we shouldn't, but are we mixing our issues? We're reaching for funding, raising capital, like going out, raising money, as if we were selling stock or something in our ideas here. And what are the chances that people who are funding the Bay Area and sea level rise and lands that are outside the ag zone, closer to the Bay, that they would even give us any money? It seems that we're using our time to do that. Is it reasonable to raise money in that pool of money?
I'm a little confused about what pool of money you're talking about. A lot of the focus of the group so far has been thinking about the federal IRA money, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the bipartisan infrastructure law, the BIL, as targets. A lot of that money is flowing through the state. We're seeing significant federal funding flowing through CAL FIRE, for example.
I just hear
it's not Baylands money particularly.
But I hear the shiny object in the ecosystem, in the ecology, is the bay. It's the sea level. These big environmental issues, but how does that money come to us? I just don't know. I don't understand how that is even possible.
So you're right that that's one of those shiny pockets and pools of money, but there are many. And the one I think that I was referring to is more transportation related, which I've become more aware of since I serve on that countywide transportation committee. SCTA staff are really experts in identifying those grant opportunities and then shopping them out to the local jurisdictions throughout the county to solicit us for our needs and then to find out which of our needs map best to the different grant opportunities in the transformation sector. And that's where this $1.25 million for Donald Gap was secured, was within that general process. So that's one bucket of funds. There are others, as David mentioned, about sequestration and CAL FIRE, and the county has been blessed compared to many, many other jurisdictions around the country. We have like a $10 million, I believe it's a 5-year Department of Agriculture grant to explore this farm carbon plan opportunity, which nobody else around the country has this opportunity. So we're out in front in this area in soliciting.
That's
funds.
the city, us, that we?
Well, BC made mention of it in respect to the countywide agriculture opportunity. The city doesn't have any significant agriculture to speak of. We do have some, but we don't have a significant amount.
I'll just finish up. So even if we raise the capital, like we have a company and we're going to raise capital for it, and we're going to have now, they have shares, they have an interest in what we're doing, where's the staff? What division of the city is going to do this? Where's the manpower? What's the plan? We don't even have a permanent planning person at the city. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive.
No, that's an excellent point, and frankly, in transportation and public works, that's been identified by our public works director as a key barrier to being able to bring more dollars in, is that he simply has his hand, he's got a lot of funding already to do the things that are already on the city's public works agenda. Many of our capital improvement priorities are on that list and are currently have a funding and an implementation plan attached to them. The things we're bringing, though, that are climate investments, that are going beyond those baseline capital improvements in order to reduce our emissions, we need to get beyond his current staff capacity. And so that's why our thinking on the Grants Ad-Hoc Committee, Cedra's work on the grant, the CAL FIRE grant, and David's perspective has been to identify where we as volunteers can perhaps get some grant funding so that we can produce additional staff people to manage these funds after they come in. But we obviously don't want to just dump this on Jennifer and Mike's lap without proper coordination. And that's what Jennifer was just suggesting with respect to the active transportation and the Vision Zero planning process, is to be sure that we have proper coordination, so it's not like we're running off to get money to put in a bike bridge over Highway 12, when in fact that's not what Public Works has time to actually manage.
And Sandra, you might say a little bit about the proposal you took the lead in writing, and we weren't asking staff to do a lot of that work. You've identified a whole team of experts who would be funded, should we hopefully win that grant, to accomplish the objectives that you've articulated. So it has nothing to do with lumping more work onto the community development planning team. It has to do with building a team with a budget to accomplish the objectives desired.
And let me just address that and two other things. The Balins things that you asked about, they're not actually a funding source. They're a consortium of organizations that have money coming into them for that project. And then they also identify priority areas that they would like to have also contribute to their effort. And so it's actually the priority lands that they identified. That information comes from them. They're the ones who said, Sonoma Creek is super important to us. We wish you guys would do this. And so when is his name BC? I'm sorry, I'm going to forget. BC mentioned the importance of collaborations and synergy. That's how these areas and partnerships get identified, is because no one agency can do anything alone anymore. There's just not enough money. And so there's an overlap where people try to find, okay, you're interested in that, we're interested in this, hey, there's an overlap, let's work together then. So that's where that part came forward. And then the grant writing piece of that, which fits into this, is a model now that you see in all kinds of cities. And so, for example, Petaluma, the way they got their CAL FIRE grants was very similar to what we did. Is there's funding that was made available through CAL FIRE, and so a group of volunteers, not unlike us, wrote a grant but they wrote in staff time and additional support and money for consultants that would all be moved through and done on behalf of the city so that it augments the development office, because the key thing we definitely do not want to do is burden Jennifer. I mean, we actually had a little bit of an argument about this. I said, I am putting staff in here for you, because she mistakenly thought that maybe she could do this. And I said, no, this is additional staff for you. So there is no way communities get grant funds to burden their already burdened staff. That would just be completely counterproductive.
In Petaluma, did the employees of the city of Petaluma do the work for the CAL FIRE grant?
What they did was have oversight. They sanctioned work.
Who performed the work?
The people that were hired off the grant money. So
I
they-
see.
Series of consultants with the right skills.
Yeah, it was a series of, well, it was both a combination of things.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was new staff people for short-term jobs, like the sustainability coordinator that used to be in Sonoma. There would be money for those kind of people, as well as consultants that would come in and do short-term project-based elements, as well as funding that would go out into the community for like interns and people like that, or to nonprofits. So these grants can be multi-million-dollar grants that are complex in terms of who the funding goes to, but it's all aimed, it has a singular focus to enhance the city and the city's objectives and goals.
But for example, the creek doesn't go through the city. So,
The creek bounds the city, so in fact it does.
Sure it does. Sonoma Creek goes through the city.
well,
Nathan's
just
in-
little pieces of it, most
Well,
of
the
it
creek
doesn't.
goes through the city.
Where? Over at the bridge, right?
Maxwell?
Yeah,
It's the whole,
Well,
it's our whole west
further
side.
down,
Right.
all the way down.
I can just hear, though, I've been on some other nonprofit committees and groups and watched them raise money. We're entrepreneuring in a way. It's an entrepreneurial effort that you're involved with. It's just good to say you're entrepreneuring. One of the umbrellas here is the city. And at what point are we really doing it for the city, or are we doing it for your nonprofits? Well, there
This
must
is
be some
totally
non.
unclear. This is all being done through the city commission under the umbrella of the city of Sonoma and its both staff and its city council. These funds would flow into the city from the federal government or from CAL FIRE or however, and they would be allocated appropriately as written in the proposal. You have money in there for Sonoma State
There's-
to be
yeah.
participating.
There's no nonprofits that are
There's not
identified
nonprofits.
in the grants. I'm not
No.
sure what you mean.
So all work would be, like any requirement for any grants received by a government entity, from a government entity, always require a proposal process, because any allocation of funds requires a competitive process. So we can't just give money. In this case, we specifically identified a partner with the school to actually provide a service that was very specific to a school, and then also was kind of like a reciprocal benefit
All right.
aspect.
I'm getting it.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
but in general, and just going back to the general overhead topic of staff and funding and things like that, everybody's correct in the sense that we're not gonna go after grants that we aren't prepared to actually implement, because I've got one right now that I'm sitting on that I haven't done anything with, and it's expiring. And I feel really bad about it, but there was no way. There was no way I was gonna be able to implement that, grant. And it's a waste of everybody's time to apply and everything. The other aspect is for staffing purposes, as much as I hire other people, that's just more people for me to manage too, and project manage. And grants have so much paperwork. It's so crazy, but cities cannot do work without grants. Like, that is how we function. It's how we put in the bridge, that's over, that we just installed, over next to Broadway, was all a Caltrans grant. So we always are looking for grants to actually implement our projects. That's why I really, whenever I remind you guys, hey, we have a list, because that's me of saying, hey, we've got this list, we've identified what years so we can focus on, so that it's focused for you guys, but it's also focused for me, so I can understand my staffing needs and priorities too to help you guys. And so it's kind of like we're a team. And that's the whole idea with the ad hocs as well. When we decided, Planning Commission's doing this too, is the fact that we are such a small town and that we have a small staff, is that I need you guys. I need your connections, your knowledge. I mean, you haven't, I don't know if you've heard me say it, but this is not my wheelhouse in climate action. I'm learning as I go, but this was not something I ever learned about. And so the key thing of these ad hoc committees is to keep the wheels turning, but to help accomplish the things that are on our list. So if I keep calling back to the list, that's why.
I guess when I hear we go outside the city boundaries, my red lights go on. It's just, it's so large, going up to the Springs, getting involved in the lives of that community. There's so many lives in our own community. And it's nice to stay in the city limits, in my way of thinking. As the commission, are you thinking of leading us outside of the city to work outside of the city?
So the city, again, the city boundaries, when we allocate funds and things, it would be within the city boundaries. There are times that we may partner with the county to implement projects in our valley. So in this case, we did look at the CAL FIRE grant. I did reach out to the Public Works. I can't remember what they didn't call their Public Works now up there, but at the county, and said, hey, do you want to join us to do this, to make it a larger ask? And I got no feedback. So that idea is, because we are not a disadvantaged community, there are, not anymore, but there were disadvantaged communities, and so we would be able to be more competitive in our grants as well.
But also, we're not actually trying to move outside the boundary. What we're trying to do is enhance our ability to be successful for the grant. And so whoever the partner is, they would be doing the outside of the city jurisdiction work as partners and collaborators, and would have alignment with us inside the boundary with the work that we're doing. So that's the whole point of, I mean, you just can't get anything done without having a partnership any longer, the way the city now has to partner. I mean, there's not enough staff, funding, and so the idea is to figure out, okay, where's that nexus point that we match up and make a pretty package at this point. But we are the city of Sonoma. They're not able to, I mean, legally they can't even spend money on some of these grants outside of the boundary line.
And yet climate issues flow across. They do not respect these narrow boundaries, and therefore we need to look at that with respect to being successful in achieving our climate objectives. Tom?
And Leo, those are good critical questions, and we should be thinking about these things. And I'd point out too, though, that the city council has set a goal this year to begin to explore integration with the Springs. I'm not sure what the actual verb is, but it is to be starting to think about the valley-wide impacts and how we might find ways to partnership with the community to the north of us. The other thing I wanted to mention is that because we've lost our funding of our sustainability coordinator, and we don't yet have complete commitment from City Council for budget to underwrite our climate action strategy, I've made a visit or two to the City Council, and we've talked about this in our ad hoc as well, to explore the City Council did just put on the ballot Measure T, which is a 0.5-cent sales tax increase. And while it was not terribly explicit about sequestering funds for climate action, I did get affirmative head nodding from members of the council that there is interest in making sure that these official city plans are in fact funded at some point. And so that funding source may be available in future for supporting some of the things on our climate action strategy. The other two things I've been doing recently is looking over some of our existing expenditures that are under the broad umbrella of climate action, specifically We spend about $25,000 a year, by my estimate, on Evergreen as a 100% renewable premium product from Sonoma Clean Power. And so, working with, speaking through our representative to the Sonoma Clean Power Board, and then directly in comments to the Sonoma Clean Power Board the other last meeting, I've asked for a little bit of feedback from management at SCP on how cost-effective that money that we're spending each year is, and how much is it returning to the benefit of the residents of the city of Sonoma. Some preliminary analysis that we've done suggests that we might not be getting a lot of bang for that buck, largely as a result of what BC just showed us, is that the default portfolio, the Clean Start Sonoma Clean Power product portfolio, has been getting so clean that we don't get a lot for our extra 2.5 cents or whatever it is, half cent, I forget exactly what the number is, forgive me, on each kilowatt hour of electricity that we use in the city municipal accounts. So we're hoping that we can get an improved value out of that spend every month. And if it doesn't come to us, then maybe we can recommend to the city council to retarget those funds in a different direction.
That's been a significant development of the grants and financing group, to be looking at that kind of expenditure between the Clean Start and the Evergreen costs.
And then just one last point on this is that I've also recently reached out to Zinzi Tan, who is our Zero Waste Sonoma County coordinator, asking about the money that we spend each year as part of our SB 1383 requirements to procure compost. And what they've been doing is setting up these compost hubs that make free compost available in other parts of the county. The concern is that we don't have a viable location here in the Sonoma Valley right now. And so Zinzi responded to me and said that we're looking for a nonprofit or public site that has the staff to oversee the compost. She has no problem to sending compost back to the valley that we could make available to people who want to use it. So this is something I intend to pursue a little bit offline, and hopefully that'll turn into more value coming back for that money that we're already spending. Because right now you have to go to Novato or American Canyon to get the compost that we are. That's the closest place to get compost for us, other than the ones that are
Those are the main centers.
for sale here.
Thank you. Good discussion. The next ad hoc to report is called Education and Outreach. It consists of Commissioner Ward, Commissioner Fogelberg, and myself. Norma, did you want to do the presentation on that topic?
It also consists of Kendall Clemons.
Yes.
So we are calling this our Climate Action Network, hyphenated into CAN. And we are preparing to reach out to the city of Sonoma with 3 projects which will engage 3 very specific areas. Hospitality or tourism is the first project. The second is schools. And the third is restaurants. And our goal is to educate and help them reduce their climate footprint. Each project has a confirmed leadership team, which will grow as the project takes more shape. The team also has a committed community leader, and that community leader brings with them an organization to support the project. And let me review the projects that we've identified to date. And also, I want to thank Jennifer, because from the beginning, you have always encouraged us to find partnerships in the community that are organizations who can bring their power and resources. So that's what we've actually done with this. So the first project is hospitality and tourism, and it's led by David, and he is working with Mark Bodenhammer of the Sonoma Chamber of Commerce, and they are busy identifying a specific type of project that they're going to be working on. They are going to be bringing together the Sonoma Valley Vintners and Growers and Sonoma Valley Tourist Bureau to this first project. And we actually want the project to be identified by this team. So we're not saying do this project, but we want to find out what's important to them in this area of climate action. So we've already met with, David and I met with Mark, and the next step is David's going to take this team, grow it, identify a project, and then engage this work with these organizations. We don't have the funds that we need typically to do projects like this. So we are going to be asking the organizations that are going to be working with us to use their social media, to use their distribution lists, their email distribution lists, to use all the power that they have and connections and engagement that they have to bring this project into fruition. So hospitality and tourism is the first one, led by David. Schools and work with students is being led by Amber in partnership with Kendall. And the partner at the community level is Jana Wang. She's the owner of Refill Madness. And she is bringing into this Sonoma Charter School. It's an elementary school. They already have a green program. They have lots of enthusiasm, and Kendall's going to be talking with her school about a project that they will activate and which groups at her school will be taking this on. And also we're looking at ways to have the high school students work with the younger students. A key point here, and I thank Cedra for this, is we really wanted to have a resident project. It's too overwhelming. We don't have the resources. We don't have the ability to collect and store data. I certainly don't want to have to create another database for a project like this. So we are encouraging each of these projects, especially the one with schools, to focus on bringing in the parents and engaging the parents on this. So with hospitality and tourism, we'll be working directly with adults, both who live here and who may be outside the community. But certainly with schools, we want to make sure that we do everything possible to ignite the client's involvement, the parents' involvement with this. And lastly, myself and Michael Heffler, who is with the Sonoma Valley Rotary, we are going to be activating a project, and we'd like to focus the project on working with restaurants in town and their use of single-use plastic versus compostable plastic. What does that mean? What's the confusion around it? And how we can generate engagement for the 25 restaurants that we've identified to date we'd like to work with, as well as the golf course over on Arnold, which Michael has great inroads. And he's already floated this idea past the environmental group at the Sonoma Valley Rotary, as well as Rotary at large in the Northern California area, so that we can create a prototype or alpha project here which can be replicated by the other environmental communities of the Rotary. So we're looking at ways to touch many groups and really ignite them, and to not make this be a single one-off. but to be able to turn it over. Next steps, each of these 3 projects are now meeting independently, so we've already activated these 3 projects, and they will create their project descriptions, engagement outlines, actions, and implementation schedules along with the first project goals. And we are really keeping all these projects to be doable and have good and positive results. We're not going to reach for the moon initially because we need more people to engage. So the projects will be scaled at first to make a quantifiable difference in the achievement of climate action, and then we'll start to scale it up once we can show how the results have been actualized.
The third is the residents?
No. So hospitality and tourists are first, schools and the students within the schools, and then restaurants. Next will be, when we start to have traction, we'll look at who would like to step forward to work with residents and how would that work. And then we also have another category, and Tom knows I'm looking at him and smiling, and it's called the city. You know, really working with the city to identify a particular project that we can use as part of this. But residents are on hold until we start to see success and traction in these other projects, as well as the city, because we all have a full plate.
And we'll reach residents through the students, hopefully, as a way to get parents involved,
Yes.
rather than our trying to do so as a underfunded commission. Thank you for an excellent report. Other questions or comments for Norma? Jennifer.
So I'm going back to my list. So remember, our list is really focused on increasing energy efficiency, water reduction, and reducing solid waste. We have funds around water. So we still have that $50,000, so we really should be focusing on the water reduction and how we're going to use that. So those are residents. That's the cash for turf. It could be rain barrels. It could be other water efficiency. So we need to look at what the existing program is, and then how do we make that better.
Okay.
And then create the material around that, and then we have somebody in-house that can make it pretty. And then we can put it out in all the water bills, right? So those are different things that we can do for residents. That's one of the things that we actually have money, so we really should do something around that. The other is...
So that should be folded into the ad hoc education and outreach, I guess, as
Yes.
I look at coordinating as necessary with grants if we need any additional resources, but we can start with the city resources already available.
So we-
And Amber, you're on that ad hoc, and you've been particularly interested, as we've discussed over the months, on the water side, and I have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so that's the water one. Since we have money, we really should get that one off and running so that we can use that money effectively. We only used, I think, 10,000 of it, of the 50,000 last year, which shocks me, honestly. And then the other is, I'm fine with focusing on the food service and having like project-based, but when I look at our website, there is a lot of information, but it is very wordy. And again, this is not, it is not my thing. And this is where it's helpful to have your guys' eyes on things to say, hey, we really need a flyer on like the food service, things that you can hand out. Composting, huge with the restaurants. We really need them to focus on that. The new law around recycling wine bottles. I mean, that's huge impact right now. What does that mean? How does that look in a flyer or educational outreach materials? And that goes with your restaurants. I know you want to focus on a measurable, but maybe there's measurable goals around something that you really want to implement, but then also there's some education, some quick education components that can be done around those different topics that are in that list that we can then put on our website and update our website, and then you can share it through the chamber and through the schools and things like that. Don't forget that they're going to be doing, who's going to do it? Bayron. The Bayron programs, right? Bayron's going to be doing a program over in the Springs with the Latino community on energy efficiency, and just trying to, again, partner. I'm trying to send you guys things when I see stuff from Bayron, but with different information. They're always a good resource for us too. They're always reaching out and being very helpful. Like, do you need me? Do you need help? And I'm like, I haven't heard anything. I don't know yet. I think those were the main things after hearing what you guys were talking about, of just bringing it back to, I'm happy with big projects and measurable goals, but if we could still get the little educational tidbits that we can share and put up on our website and circulate in different points. So if somebody comes and says they want a compost pail, I can say, here's some composting information.
Yeah.
Just
Can
stuff
you
like that.
say more? Originally, you said something aside from funding for water, waste. You brought up
The solid waste. We
yeah.
have a reduction of solid waste as one of our goals. And so we had a number of items that we were looking at. So sorry, I was just going back to the list. We had talked about, and so I'm looking everywhere I put O. So remember we went through and we identified staff, so this one's staff, and O is the outreach and education group. So the ban on disposable food serviceware, to enforce that, that connects to that one. Also the increased use of compliant items, let's see. Adopt a plastic bag ordinance, that can wait. Increase zero waste practices, and that's where I was going with, if you're already working with restaurants and increasing our organic waste segregation, that those, and the schools too.
Right, that's
And
what
even
we're
City
looking
Hall.
at for the schools.
Yeah, and even City Hall, but grabbing in and getting that information, how does maybe each one of those sectors implement? Or maybe there's just a general handout around some of those topics that even a resident could pick up and
Thanks for
say,
reminding me.
that we could say as a resident, go, oh yeah, I'm the worst at composting, I'll be completely honest. But that is, I'm constantly going, what is that recycled? Is that the, I don't know. But I did put my green bin out today, so there is stuff in it. But just helping the businesses too, right, with all of this.
Yes, and would you mind forwarding to me again that list? And I'll send it.
I'll send it to everybody, just as a reminder for everybody, that's the list from the climate action strategies, that can help define projects too with your different entities. I am on the city end. I'm redoing our WELO, our water efficiency landscaping ordinance requirements and implementation. I'm also reestablishing the construction waste requirements and relooking at that. So I am doing things that fall within my department in this waste and educating our contractors and our builders and our the architects and stuff too. So I'm going to do my end of it as well with these types of things too.
I'm writing an article for publication on the difference between recycling and the different kinds of compostable, and we're meeting with Recology, and we'll meet with Sonoma Waste. No, Sonoma, our collectors.
Sonoma garbage collection.
Yes, thank you. So I'd love to put together something for the town about that, because it's just such a mystery topic. So can you and I connect on that level?
I have it on my list to reach out to all the Ad-Hoc after this meeting.
Okay, thanks, Jen.
We're not surprised. Norma, thank you. Anything else on your end? I would just supplement as a member of this Ad-Hoc. that the work with the Sonoma Chamber appears to be really has great potential as they bring in the vintners and growers as well. And we think that one or more foundations, back to the grants idea, may be intrigued with the idea of a city climate action group in a tourist-based city working with the Chamber of Commerce and the business community. It's not always that the Greens are working with the other kind of Greens, the greenbacks. So we think some foundation support might be attractive. And while we agree we're going to start sort of small, kind of small, there's already a fair amount of excitement about the idea of an electric trolley. And that's a much bigger bite, but there are big bites available out there. So we're going to keep that in mind as we're already starting that discussion with the Chamber about wouldn't it be great if we had an electric trolley running from the lodge all the way through Sebastiani Winery back west to Sonoma Market and Safeway, and then out into the Springs, up with the hotels partly funding this. So I hope to be able to bring back positive stuff, but we've got our eyes on a bigger prize than just sort of having a few conversations.
If I may?
Yes, sir.
So,
You may.
all good conversation. I'm excited to hear this outreach work and retargeting us by the priorities we've set in the past. On what David just said about the tourism coordination, I've been hearing around the county that we're not the only jurisdiction that is interested in these electric trolleys. And I think the writing is clearly on the wall that moving people around more efficiently is going to be something we want to do, and the tourism business community is going to want to be actively engaged in how that happens. So I'm glad that this conversation has started. I believe we are also looking at the renewal of our tourism improvement district, which is a source of funds. Currently, that money has that been a topic that's been broached yet? Because I know that many affordable housing advocates, for example, are looking at that funding source, and I get the nexus between affordable housing and tourism sustainability, but I also see climate action as having a critical nexus as well. So I think that's something we might want to look at and have that conversation about how best to invest those funds for both the objectives of tourism promotion, but climate smart tourism promotion. On solid waste, I did come across on the website this Sorted Sonoma Edible Food Generator Requirements webpage that talks about the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 commercial edible food generators. And this is the idea that the state law actually requires our largest generators of food waste to move that food out of there, to make sure it doesn't get thrown out, and then if it needs to be thrown out, it goes in the proper channel. Are you aware of this existing sort of program? Because I can't remember from our climate action strategy if Travis actually listed the restaurants that meet the Tier 1 and Tier 2 criteria. I don't think he did get specific in the public document, but it's something that, frankly, we ought to know. And that I see your work with Michael Heffler to try to get your hands wrapped around that. So I'll just hand that over to you right now. And then water, excellent point about water. My question about the Cash for Turf program, it's apparently undersubscribed, perhaps because of lack of promotion, but also perhaps because it's been running for a long time. Maybe the people who had the most opportunity to take advantage of it have not. but maybe we need some either creative outreach strategies to target it to the high water consumption customers.
At my home, we used it, and now we have no more grass.
And you don't have grass.
So
you don't
now we
high
have
water.
no ability to make any further use of cash
Exactly.
for,
But that doesn't mean.
not grass, but turf.
But you're not the only person.
Just an
You're not the only household in Sonoma, and there are households that might benefit from it if they knew it existed. And we could probably target those by doing a poll of the water bill, the high water use customers inside the city limits, to see if those people might be interested in a subsidy program to help them, to nudge them, as the word we like to use. So just another outreach idea on the water.
So with the water too, it's a water rebate line item, and so it's not just the cash for turf, there is another program associated with it. And so we need to work with Public Works to identify, to make my understanding is as long as it's associated with water waste reduction, it can use that line item because it is in our water budget. So it would be, I don't know, it could be the rain barrel program that we looked at. There's, I think it was St. Helena that I looked at, that had tons of different water reduction grant programs that were reasonable cost-sharing programs.
Excellent, excellent. So let's move next, watching our clock as well, to the building ad hoc, which is Philip and Tom, according to my list. You don't have a third?
No, we clearly need a third, so let me tell you how exciting it is to be on this subcommittee.
Yes, sir.
And I think everyone should want to be on it, but it hasn't happened that way yet. Well, first, I'm going to let Tom has really shined, doesn't like to talk much, so I'll do a little bit of talking, but I'm going to turn it over to you. I think the first time on our agenda is to meet with you, Jennifer, because you've got a lot of ideas that we really need to explore and with you, because I'll just give you an example. One of our building targets is expand solar, PV solar. I called 3 solar companies for my own condo down the street. 2 don't exist anymore, and 1 wasn't interested. I mean, it's really, right now, a tough market. So we really need your help, I think, to define what it is you want to help us do in those areas that we've set as targets. Vice Chair Conlon?
Yeah, I mean, the conversations that Philip and I have had over the last couple of months, and we really, residential sector in particular is just enormous and a lot of work. And without dedicated staff in this area, it's difficult. We do have dedicated staff in the form of Bayren and the coordination staff at the County Administrator's Office, CARD, the Climate Action Resiliency Division, who came and spoke with us last meeting, I believe it was. That is our primary residential outreach workforce right now for getting the word out about the availability of these programs. So Philip and I identified that, especially for the existing building sector, as the best group to coordinate with. The question, though, is how do we make sure that they pay attention to Sonoma City, Sonoma Valley, because their responsibilities are county-wide, and we oftentimes are an afterthought down here. So they have set up some appointments and some outreach events down here, but I think we could do a lot better job if we worked through your networking, your local networking, to make sure that their materials are readily available through the channels that we all participate in here. So each one of us should probably have Bayren literature that we're passing out to our friends and families and our Rotary clubs and whatnot. So those are kinds of things that we can be doing as members of this commission to get access to that group, specifically in the buildings space. The other main thing in buildings, and this is in our packet tonight, the new construction, and that's the REACH codes. And so I really just wanted to put that in there as an open-ended question to Jennifer to ask where are we on implementation of the new building code, and do you have the resources that you're going to need to do both the minimum, obviously, just a lot of work just updating for the new minimum code, but then also the potential of a REACH code, which we recommended in our strategies.
So to do the REACH code, we definitely are going to need funds. I'm assuming that would be something that our CPA would be funding or helping with. In a lot of these cases, and sometimes we look to other, like with this code that's coming up, I need to look closer to see where we're at and where we would actually want to be. In some cases, it may not be in our best interest to spend money on a certain type of REACH. For example, for the general plan land use discussion that we're going to be having next week, I was looking at how many new commercial buildings we've had in the last 20 years, and the number was 3. So that's not really a good sign for implementation of solar on commercial. And then, in residential world, again, we already require solar in a lot of things in homes. So how far do we actually reach? And so that's part of what the conversation will be.
It's mostly natural gas limitation.
Right, and so then we look at gas and we look at usage, right? And I know that in my last jurisdiction, when we did the REACH to do all electric, we were murdered. Politically, we had to take a major step back, have a whole nother round of community meetings with business owners, restaurateurs, homeowners, and really kind of look at what does that mean to them? Like, how does that impact people? Same thing when we passed the leaf blower ordinance, right? When you pass these new rules, who is it impacting, right? How does that impact their financial well-being? So all decisions always have an economic impact, and so making sure that we're understanding all of those things. And so that's where we just need to figure out what that REACH is based on where the code's going. And then if another community like ours has done a REACH that we are looking to do because they're still actually reaching beyond what this one is, I've seen it where we can hire somebody, kind of use that as the base and then modify for us. So, but again, it takes money to do all the math associated with the REACH to actually submit. So, just throwing that out there. I'm not against it. We'll need to talk about it and do community engagement around moving forward with any suggested. So we 3 can meet, and whoever wants to join us is a third. I think they're looking at you, Leo. And then we can come back to this group and say, okay, this is the things that we've been looking at, and that we're going to go forward and start doing some community engagement around, and then move from there.
All fair points, because I know a lot of templates are out there, and a lot of that quantitative work theoretically should be done, but the fact that it actually needs to get localized and then sold locally is always a challenge. So we don't want to do that if it's only going to impact one building in the next code cycle, particularly when the economics are leaning now so favorably against gas from a cost savings perspective to the developer. A lot of the commercial buildings I'm seeing go in, even without the requirement, are having all electric proposed because of the cost savings to the developer.
Anything else on the buildings discussion from any of the commissioners?
Just one thing, so a reach would be like having everybody go all electric. Yeah.
So a
Right, I mean, an
reach-
example in that list.
So, yeah, so an example in that list, yes, that would be a reach, because right now, the building code, the California Energy Code does not state that it has to be all electric, and that and gas isn't allowed. So that's a reach. A reach would be, previously, a reach would have been all single-family residential has to install solar, when before it was only that you had to be solar ready. Right, and so we've moved progressively with each code change from a ready mode. So like right now, we're in the EV ready mode for EV chargers, and we're moving towards an actual installation requirements around EV charging.
I just looked into doing, moving to induction electric, big range. And it was a big project. To reach farther within my own panel, it would cost me $40,000. I just brought in PG&E. It cost me $15,000 to change my gas line. So the costs are so huge. You just run into a wall. Yeah. So, yeah, the building sounds complicated. I don't know if I want to join that committee.
Let me make it more enticing for you. Every 5 years, the state changes the building code. Every 5 years, it gets more restrictive on and more energy efficient. Hopefully, that's what they intend to do. We're in the process of getting ready for the next one, which will come in a year. And there are some programs. Bayron has run a couple programs on what the changes may be and what they have been for the last 5 to 10 years. You can go on the website and you can watch Zoom they did a few weeks back on explaining all this. So there's a lot of information out there that I'm in the process of simulating. I'm going to go into a program they're doing on water heaters and changing from natural gas. They're all free. And I can honestly tell you that my wife said, "Can I go too?" That's how interested she is. Well, I made her. So maybe I can make it more enticing for you to do too. Because this is innovation, this is really creative, and when you see what people have thought about and done, it's really encouraging to do that. So you're welcome to join us anytime you want. I think Tom was going to buy dinner, I think it was.
We can all join.
I think that's what he said. Maybe I misheard it.
Under the Brown Act, we can't eat, we can just come.
Yeah. Transportation reports, by the way, is not going to be a lot different in that if you look at the goals we established, things like bike paths and those types of things are really not something that lend themselves for us to be proactive about, because we have a lot of people who are proactive about that. And that's why we really should talk with you and get your perspective and Norma's perspective as well. And so that's on our list of what we want to do in the future. I'm preempting Tom. But one of us moved across the country in the last few weeks. One of us got very ill. Because I can't explain that because of HIPAA requirements, but so we've been a little bit stymied, but we'd like to talk to you about what you see us doing and how we can help you.
We've jumped into the transportation
Yes.
ad hoc clearly. Are there any other comments from members of the transportation group? That's Tom and Norma.
Well, we did not meet specifically as a transportation ad hoc since our last meeting. However, we did talk about the active transportation plan, and I think many of us individually spoke to this county staff. I know also my colleague who lives here in town with Sierra Club, Dan Mayhew, met with those consultants as well and talked a lot about the draft project plan, which Mike Berger put together, I think, the list of sidewalk gap closures and class 1 and 2 and 3 bike lane improvements that will be hopefully codified and embedded in that active transportation plan. And then we'll go and talk to traffic safety about it, and we'll get the Vision Zero plan in place. By the way, the Vision Zero dashboard that the team at SCTA has put together, fascinating data on where the collisions are happening, where the real dangerous parts of our community are. I know the Traffic Safety Committee this past year worked on the speed table on East Napa Street near the, what I call the Catholic Cemetery.
Yeah, they put some speed bumps in there.
Yeah, and we went over them the other day, and I asked my family that was visiting from out of town, hey, did you notice that? And they're like, oh, we love speed tables like this. It slows the traffic down and makes us feel safer. So that was an unsolicited opinion. And other transportation-related announcements. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission has proposed a draft amendment to Plan Bay Area 2050 Plus to potentially add the SMART train going all the way up to Healdsburg, which has long been a part of SMART's funding vision, but MTC has historically not been able to justify the significant expense versus the small number of riders that would tend to use such a train. So MTC is out for comment on this draft plan, and they're going to be coming to Sonoma on the 25th of August. This I guess it says Sunday at the Plaza, 2 to 5 p.m. It happens to coincide with the music event that's on the Plaza, which they make clear on the MTC website. And they'll be taking our input at that meeting. So I encourage my fellow commissioners to explore it. And I think what I'm going to do is share that with you so you can distribute that information to the group. And then I just had one more question, and this may be going back a little bit to buildings, but we had a person from the public come to our last meeting and ask about permit cost barriers to, I think it was solar electric batteries.
I think it was EV chargers.
It was EV charging?
chargers with a very high permit fee.
EV chargers, thank
Yeah,
you.
Yeah.
I did this from memory. So, and, you know, one of the things I think that we should be trying to do in these quarterly meetings is just try and be responsive to the members of the public and try and do our best to follow up on the concerns that they raise. So I haven't asked about that anyplace else, but, and maybe Jennifer, you haven't had progress on that. It's not necessarily your, I guess it is your domain. So go ahead and let me see.
It is my department too. So that was I have not looked at specifically. I do know why that one is different than others. That being said, in general, I am going forward to City Council next week for a citywide fee study. And so when I do that next week, we'll start a study that will take about 6 months and look at all of our different types of permits and, you know, from city, you know, building department, planning, public works, special events, everything. Looking at all of our costs associated with those permits as well. And then bringing, what happens in a fee study is that we look at what is the cost, and so what is that fee that we need to charge at the highest level, and then City Council then decides where under that barrier they want to charge. And so in certain cases, staff will probably make recommendations around incentivizing certain types of permits. And so the cost recovery, we call it, would be less than other types of permits.
Very good. And that might be the kind of thing that members of the commission might want to help with that prioritization discussion for the city council to make their decision.
Excellent, very good.
Business permits are just too cheap.
The business permits, I know I just went and got one last year, it's just too cheap.
The business license?
Yeah.
The $35, you don't?
It's not enough.
We're looking at all of them. I have fees that have been the same since the 80s, so we're going to look at them all.
I have a couple questions about the transportation subcommittee work. BC also made some comments about heat in some of their areas of focus. And when we were doing the urban forestry application, heat island impact and where you plant trees and prioritization made me look at the draft plan projects from the city. And it looked like to me, and I just would like to see if my impression was correct or not, or have somebody correct me. Are we looking at, is it just sidewalk improvements, or are there other elements to what we have identified as priorities for active transportation in the city? Because all I noticed within the boundaries of the city was sidewalk repair, and I don't know if I would necessarily think of that as a comprehensive active transportation. Sorry, are you, oh, somebody's pointing. Oh, okay, great.
All right, so the active transportation plan, it identifies improvements that are necessary. So one of them is closing gaps, right, on sidewalks. So that's part of it. Is we've got gap closures to make. We have locations that don't have sidewalks at all. We have bike lanes that don't exist, are needed, maybe need to change the type. So they'll identify those. They'll identify the gaps where we have linkages that are needed. It also identifies some studies that we're looking to do. An example of that would be West Napa and 5th Street, that intersection right there, and the Safeway exit that has that pedestrian crossing, that whole mess right there. To look at that, we are looking at sidewalk crossing improvements and doing, they've identified as well for the actual city trail to do raised crossing in certain locations. And so it does identify different types of improvements, and along with, you know, what we were talking about earlier about low-hanging fruit, which is really the gaps, right? Just trying to close the gaps. And then the more expensive projects is going to be continuation of City Trail all the way down to Shelville. That's the big, I would call the big ticket item that's in this list. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I'm just curious if we want to participate with any of that, or have, because that cuts across so many domain areas, from trees to transportation to canopy and heat island impact. So it impacts various climate strategies. It impacts, I'm sure, the Trees Commission, and of course the transportation group. So I'm just curious, how does that work?
So the active transportation plan is managed by SCT or STC. So many letters. And what's happening is we're getting ready to, they'll have another draft for another round of public comments. And so, I don't know if you remember, but during my director's comment, I'll say we had I mentioned that we had a presentation at Planning Commission by the STC of what they were proposing. And then we had a couple of meetings, and you came to those different meetings. And so those are the opportunities as individuals to participate. If we're getting down to the end of it, what we do with the general plan is we incorporate that active transportation plan into our circulation element. If I'm reading your mind, I think you're thinking about greening and the trees part of it. So active transportation is going to be focusing on infrastructure in the sense of concrete or other materials.
And of course, I think of trees as green infrastructure.
I know, I'm going there. I was getting there. The circulation element is the body in which when we talk about, when the elements are coming forward in a little bit, that's where talking about, what did you call it on your list? Sorry, I'm jumping to trees for a second. Your green links thing. Your green links idea is, that would be an idea to put in as a goal or a strategy or policy to move forward with as part of the kind of like a combo circulation element as well as sustainability. But that being said, we do have on our list to do the cool corridor application too, right? And so looking at where we have gaps. So if we don't get the CAL FIRE grant, I'm jumping to trees, I'm so sorry. I know it's next. So if we don't get the CAL FIRE grant, we did get the budget to go ahead and move forward with the tree inventory and the canopy coverage. And so those two tools will then help us to actually do the good cool corridor and our pocket parks and really identify where, we've done a lot of it already when we applied for the grant, but to actually get to the nitty-gritty and have our own GIS understanding of what's out there will help us do more refined studies, right, around where we're going to want to implement more of these projects for tree programs, or other, like the Green Links project or things like that. But that's where, when I read the list, I made note to myself about it being in the general plan as something that would be a good place for it with the circulation element.
Excellent. Sandra, you had more?
Well, it's just jogging my mind, of course, because I was thinking about the REACH codes and buildings now, and energy use and trying to electrification, because of course trees, while sequestration is very important, their placement in helping reduce energy use with buildings and how they're used in cities as, they're a tool, right? They're green, yes, but they're also functionally a climate strategy tool. And so I was thinking about the no net loss. That would be a REACH code in terms of tree coverage and canopy and heat islands and so all that. And so that's what I was thinking about. Okay, so if we want to make those kind of recommendations as climate strategy for REACH codes, what's that process?
So REACH code is a defined aspect as it relates to a building code.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and that's in the energy efficiency world and things like that, not necessarily trees.
Some of the building codes that I was looking at has trees as part of their no net loss canopy as a regulation or ordinance to support their energy lot building. That's what I was asking.
And so Philip's reaching forward because that's more of a lead. When we're talking about lead implement, like some cities have adopted some of the lead guidelines on site design, and they're more of like guidelines, and some of them are development standards around tree placement, saving your trees, things like that, because that is a numerical aspect.
Actually, it's more natural. Using native plants gets you points, for example. And because you're looking at one area, one discrete building, how are you going to make that building work? And sometimes they'll incorporate that kind of thing in the building codes for your rebuilding. But it's more what's a natural native plant. What doesn't need a lot of water now.
And that goes with our WELO ordinance here in the state, our water efficiency landscape ordinance requirements.
Just a side sidebar, sorry to take you down that road, just
Well,
curious.
I want to drag us there, hold us there for just one more moment,
Okay.
because you are talking about, there are very definite energy efficiency benefits from shading adjacent to the building you're actually building.
Right.
And there are codes in Japan for 20-plus years now on, you can't shade a building with a high-rise because you have to think about the solar shadow you cast on your neighbors. So those kinds of things have been codified in other building codes. The problem in trying to do something like that for trees, and this may have been addressed in the specific code you were referencing, is the permanence of a tree. Because if it's on your front lawn and you own it and it shades your south-facing window, you're definitely going to get a electricity savings benefit from that. On the other hand, if you decide to cut it down, it's gone. And so that's why it's not currently recognized in Title 24, because it's not determined to be enforceable historically by the building permit check process. Now, a no net loss
That's what I'm talking about.
provision as part of the city's tree protection ordinance is an interesting idea. And I think we talked about these kinds of ideas in our 3-commission meeting, but I don't think we finalized that protection ordinance yet. And this may be inspection and enforcement burdensome to actually implement. So I think that's to be determined, but it's not an idea I would just dismiss out of hand. I think it's a good idea.
It's something you can look at, but when you do an energy efficiency calculation for a building, you look at things like the coatings that are on the windows, which have more of an impact than the tree next door. What kind of surface coatings you have affect what your energy use of the building is.
We're starting to see no net loss regulations in various cities so when you're talking about, okay, getting something ready and then it becomes code that's implemented statewide. And so the CAL FIRE and various other groups are putting this in as a requirement for projects that involve them. And so Petaluma has a no net loss policy. Napa has a no net loss policy. And so if you have a parcel that you want to develop and there's trees on it, it's more about their interest in terms of heat island effect and other such things. So, for example, we have a 21% canopy coverage in Sonoma. The goal generally, most people will say for cities, is 30% canopy coverage. And so the idea is not to have a parcel then when you have a new development project that reduces canopy coverage of your city, but rather a no net loss policy, and perhaps, better yet, one that builds up to 30% net of a city. And so that's what we're starting to see spread across California, are these no net loss tree canopy policies, not individual trees, but a canopy policy.
Right, and not buildings.
The old kind of policy is about wetlands. If you take a little bit of a wetland, you've got to someplace else have double the amount.
You have to have compensation.
Yeah, it's compensation. But you can build the building you want as long as you compensate to.
Within reason, like you
right.
can't have all the whole west side become,
I think that's probably something we might do. Even.
Yeah, I think that's where, when we talked about all these ideas around the trees, our first goal, right, is understand what we have so we can document it and then be able to set our baseline. Do the urban forestry management plan, get that implemented. That's going to talk about what our strategy for regulation and incentives, right? And then doesn't mean that we can't set some initial kind of goals within our general plan, under sustainability. I mean, these are different things that can go into a general plan as well to kind of set the stage of what we're looking for. May not get into the nitty gritty. It kind of sets the big picture of exploring, studying, research, like that kind of level in a general plan, do the urban forestry management plan. And then these are the types of things to explore. Thank you.
Any other comments on the trees reporting? Sandra, you've covered everything you need to cover?
I think that's most of our.
Okay, this is good.
I'd like to, I'll add one thing. This is an area that I have some expertise in. The whole idea of the plant cover that's here in Sonoma, has to change. And you can see, at Friedman's and that, it's starting to change. They're starting to import plants now into the system that are going to be better for here. And they kind of fall into two groups. Broadly, one group is what's down in Southern California, in the San Diego region up to Long Beach. That's really called cold desert, and there are trees that are growing in there that are probably going to come up here. And then there are horticultural trees that are in South Africa, Burma, and they've been into the nursery system in the Central Valley, and now they're getting involved with the landscape architects, including the ones here in town, like Podocarpus icy blue. Incredibly beautiful tree, and it's more narrow. And it's tall, it can be tall. So that's just a very interesting area to have the city come up with a plant list for landscapers versus the native trees. Of course, the oak is really great, but it's a messy tree. Yeah, so I'm interested in the trees, or at least stopping by your committee.
Excellent. So I think that takes care of items for discussion. Agenda item 3, we're moving on. Jennifer, to any director comments and announcements at this point at 8:45?
I'm just gonna send everybody an email. Tom, if you could send me the information on the August 25th of it, and then I'll send one email to everybody, and then I'll send separate emails to each group. I do have new planning staff joining us August 26th and September 9th. I'll have 2 new planners. And so getting that organized. Our next meeting is, help me math people, November. And so in the meantime, we'll have our separate commission or ad hoc committees meet, and I'll send out some information, but also follow. We're going to be continuing to talk about land use with the general plan, and before we meet again, we'll be going back to City Council and Planning Commission with that draft land use map, and then we'll have some public engagement around that. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Congratulate you, by the way, it's just on the biggest water bottle I've ever seen. It's really massive. Congratulations.
That's the next official meeting of this commission, but we may call a special meeting as necessary as things evolve. Our next agenda item as we move along are any commissioner reports and comments that want to be made? Philip just gave his. Any others? Kendall, what's going on? The school has started a care committee. Can you sort of give us a little update on the SVHS perspective?
Sure, yeah. So school started 3 days ago, so clubs haven't started yet, but they should be starting up in September. I'm still going to be co-president of the Earth Club, and I'm looking forward to doing more stuff with that. Trying to think if there's any more updates. I'm in Slate now, so basically I'm the president of my school, so that means I have more connections to admin and like the school board, so that's good for climate things that I'm interested in if I want to like express my concerns. So hopefully there's more improvements this year.
Excellent. Maybe at some point we can bring in a group of your team to join us in a meeting of this commission. Would be kind of nice. Come in for an hour and have a little back and forth with your whole team. Might be kind of a nice thing to do if we could arrange it. Tom, commissioner reports?
Well, just on that one, I wanted to ask, I had heard city clerk say that many of the student commission slots are expiring. I just want to be sure you've been reappointed, or if that's an administrative item we need to attend to. You haven't heard about that, right?
The clerk will reach out to all the students to let them know of the expiration, and they'll have to, I believe they all have to reapply if they want to continue on.
Well, I found your input to be valuable, so I hope you stick around. Thank you.
Any last comments from any of my colleagues? Going once, twice? It's out. Done.